Welcome to This Explainer. Right off the bat, we're diving into a fascinating new article that tackles a massive issue, the misallocation of human resources in the modern church. Have you ever felt like church is, well, kind of just a spectator sport? Today, we're using this incredible framework called the Timothy Mandate as our backdrop to look at a highly practical fix. Our goal? Restoring true organic disciple-making. We're getting past all the theological abstractions and looking at exactly what it takes to build people up from the foundational roots.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to hit 5 key areas. 1, the resource misallocation crisis. 2, the broken discipleship chain. 3, the Timothy Mandate. 4, the minimum viable model. And finally, 5, the reproductive horizon. Let's jump right in.
So we actually have to start with a pretty jarring question from the source material. Think about this. If your church literally disappeared today, how many people could actually stand on their own 2 feet? If the building is gone, does the believer actually have deep internal roots? Not just the ability to go find another building or parrot a sermon they heard, but actually stand firm? We really have to ask ourselves if we're just building people who know how to gather, or if we're building people with a deep enough spiritual root system to endure totally without the institutional scaffolding.
Which brings us to Section 1, the resource misallocation crisis and the subtle danger of the fully trained pastor.
Now think about this massive disparity, a 90-10 split in how ministry is handled. This really illustrates the heavy centralization of competence. You see, when pastors become the absolute default managers for everything, onboarding, admin, teaching, the whole shebang, it unintentionally suppresses organic leadership. You've got mature believers who could totally be handling these roles under pastoral oversight. But instead, our human resources get heavily skewed toward credentialed specialists. And the equipped saints, well, they're mostly left sitting on the sidelines.
And this leads us right into a really difficult but absolutely crucial question we've all got to ask. Are pastors equipping the saints, or are they replacing them? Seriously, think about it. Does theological training expand ministry participation across the congregation, or does it kind of accidentally monopolize it? Because when ordinary believers get reduced to mere attendance or just low-trust volunteer stuff like, unlocking doors or handing out bulletins, the church literally loses its reproductive instinct.
You can clearly see the contrast between these two approaches. On one hand, you have a program culture. It basically defaults to treating people like interchangeable blocks. Sure, it's anonymous and scales up super easily, but it really only transfers information. On the flip side, a formation culture demands real proximity. It's truly life on life, requiring people to genuinely see each other and focus on character growth. It is literally the stark difference between managing a giant crowd of spectators and actually equipping a mobilized army.
All right, Section 2, the broken discipleship chain and losing that reproductive instinct. We've arrived at the core diagnosis of this explainer. This famous verse from 2 Timothy isn't just some nice poetic thought. As our source emphasizes, this is the exact blueprint. 4 generations are packed into a single sentence here. Paul to Timothy, to faithful men, to others also. That's the system. That is the exact mechanism by which the gospel was meant to advance across time and geography. It relies entirely on multiplication, not concentration.
So how exactly do we break this reproductive chain? Well, we basically relied on 3 well-intentioned modern substitutions. First up, the sermon. Now, sermons are fantastic for teaching, but they default to spectator formation. Second, the program. We made it the primary structure for relationships, but honestly, it's way too easy to just hide in a crowd, which leads to anonymous formation. And third, information transfer. We somehow bought into this idea that an informed person is automatically a formed person. But data transfer without life application? That's just discipleship without reproduction.
And the tragic results of all this? We've built a hyper-professionalized culture. Ordinary believers just don't see themselves as capable of meaningful spiritual labor anymore. Ministry becomes something performed exclusively by the pros. We literally swapped out the messy, personal, intentional investment of one life into another for polished, highly produced goods, and those just cannot deliver deep formation.
Moving on to Section 3, the Timothy Mandate, a blueprint for intentional formation.
If the old ways of scaling are failing us, we have to look back at the pattern Jesus and Paul actually used. The source gives this wonderfully robust definition of biblical discipleship. Unlike a standard academic program, true discipleship shapes the entire person. Doctrine shapes the mind, character shapes the soul, and mission shapes the will. And the ultimate goal is always reproduction. Because let's face it, doctrine without character is just orthodoxy with absolutely zero moral weight. We need all 3 working in tandem.
So what does this actually look like over time?
This formation arc is a continuous, multi-year journey. We're not talking about a quick 6-week class here. In the early months, it starts with prayerful selection and close proximity. Then comes action, actually modeling the work and deploying people to do it. By year 2, you hit the refinement stage. This is pressure. This takes serious time because remember, you aren't just transferring data, you are forging a human being. And finally, year 3 and beyond brings that public affirmation and full release.
Which brings us to a really hard truth about that refinement stage. If no one is confronting you, no one is forming you. Real formation requires the absolute courage to have honest and, sometimes incredibly uncomfortable debriefs. When a disciple fails or shrinks back, a true discipler has to step in and ask the tough questions to course correct. Because let's be real, a relationship without correction, that's just a friendship with Bible verses.
Okay, Section 4, the minimum viable model, the executable core for today.
Now, if that multi-year timeline feels a little overwhelming, don't sweat it. Here is a highly practical fix you can implement this week. You don't need some complex curriculum. You just need this simple, breathable 4-part meeting shape. First, get an honest account. Expose the real struggles, no sanitized versions allowed. Second, scripture engagement. Connect the biblical text directly to the specific struggle you just talked about. Third, pray together. And fourth, forward movement. Leave with a specific, actionable assignment for the week. Consistently doing this keeps the relationship from drifting back into casual, comfortable chats.
And finally, Section 5, the reproductive horizon, the ultimate goal of discipleship.
This is the terminus of the entire framework. Everything, the proximity, the doctoring, those hard debriefs, it's all aimed at releasing fully formed discipler evangelists. As the article brilliantly puts it, if it doesn't overflow, it hasn't taken root. Evangelism and church planting shouldn't need some high-pressure, rigid program to guilt people into acting. It should just be the natural downstream overflow of a life so deeply shaped by the gospel that they literally cannot keep it to themselves. If a disciple doesn't ultimately multiply, well, they simply haven't finished the arc.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought from the source material. What if we completely stopped measuring attendance and instead started building a true culture of reproductive formation? Seriously, what would your church look like in 10 years if the men and women in your congregation were intentionally, reproductively forging one another? It is an absolutely incredible vision, and it all starts with just one intentional relationship. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this framework radically shifts how you invest in others.